Hi there, interghost here, and I'm doing my top reads of 2024. Now this year I read 53 books, which is probably the most books I've ever read in a single year. I'm not going to review them all like I did with the last year's video, because that will just go on forever. Last year's video was about an hour long, so I want to keep this one a lot shorter. So what I intend to do is just review the top 10 books that I've read this year. All of these are 4 to 5 star books in my opinion, and a lot of them are Richard LAymon books. Now a couple of years ago I went through a phase of getting really into Stephen King. You might be able to see all behind me are Stephen King books. Those two bottom shelves there are full of Stephen King books, and I really got into reading him. Now this year I've really gotten into reading Richard LAymon, which is another horror writer from the 80s. I've read a few of his books and I've really gotten into reading him. So I think sort of 3/4 of the books I'm going to say are in my top 10 this year are his books. So I apologise if you don't like his stories, but that is what I've been reading mostly this year. So I've tried to put them in order from 10 to 1. It's been quite hard to do that, so they're all really good books, and this is the order that I put them in. So at number 10, I've got The Cellar by Richard LAymon. Now this is actually his first released novel, I think, from 1980, and it's part of a series of books. Like I said, it's his first book he ever published. It's all to do with a place called the Beast House, and I think there's 4 or 5 Beast House books. I actually read this one second because I didn't know it was part of a series. And this one, although it's a really good book, is probably the weakest in the series. So it's basically, there's a house out in the middle of this like backwater town, and people go missing when they go into this house, and they're being killed by these beasts. They're sort of like big white monkey type things who attack people, and so there's like a legend that there's these beasts that come at night. Now there's sort of 2 stories going on in this book. It's a quite a short story, but there is a lady and her daughter which are escaping from their town which they live in, and they're moving into this town, and her husband attacked her daughter and went to prison for it, and now her husband has been released from prison, so she's escaping from him, and she ends up in this town, and this guy is coming out to track them down. And then the other story going on is there's a guy who, when he was a kid, him and his friend went into the house to try and disprove this beast theory, and he saw his friend get killed by one of these beasts, and nobody believed him. Now he's grown up and he's gone back to the town as an adult to try and kill these beasts, and they sort of meet up together, and they end up going into the house and finding the beast, and I won't ruin the ending. The thing which I think lets down this story is Richard LAymon is very into extreme horror, and he likes to put in women being attacked sexually. And there's part in this where the husband who's been released from prison, he kills a family, and he takes she's sort of like 9 or 10-year-old girl hostage, and then he ends up attacking her, which I think lets this book down a lot. And I think this is a lot of reasons people don't like this book. Yeah, that bit is pretty nasty, and if you get triggered easy, I'd say yeah, beware of that bit in there. But ignoring the child attack, the rest of the book is a pretty good read. Just wish that bit wasn't in there really. So that's my number 10 book. My number 9 book is Welcome to Cooper by Tariq Ashkanani. I hope I'm saying that right. Now this is a book which I just picked up on a whim from a charity shop, just because first of all I liked the cover, and then I read the back and it sounded really interesting. It's not a person I've heard of before. Basically it's a crime book set in a Nebraskan town, I think, out in the middle of nowhere, in the snow, in the cold, and there is a disgraced cop which has been moved from one town into this middle of nowhere town, and all the police, including the main character, are all sort of corrupt in this town. And it starts off with a woman who's been killed, and they find her in the snow, and she's had her eyes scooped out and murdered. And it just so happens that there was a serial killer in the town that was released quite close to when this murder happened. So the police are pinning this murder on this serial killer. Now the new cop who's in the town, he can see that it isn't this guy, and he's trying to find the real killer. The rest of the police are telling him to leave it alone. They want to pin it on this serial killer, but he doesn't know why. So he's digging into that. It's got quite a good perspective. It jumps between his story and then also the serial killer, and it goes back and forth, and it's quite a good way of doing it, because then you see what the killer of the woman, the real killer, why he's doing what he's doing, and it keeps going backwards and forwards until the end. And there was a part at the end of this book, don't want to ruin it, but there's a female character in this, and something really horrific happens to her, and I was very shocked at the end of this book. So that really made it stick out in my mind. So that's Welcome to Cooper. Now my number 8 book is, try and get this right, The Colorless Tsuruku Tazaki. It's a Japanese book which is being translated into English, and the reason I read this book is because I was watching a YouTube video where somebody was going around asking people what their favourite book of all time was, and somebody suggested this and they described the book and it sounded really cool, so I ordered it and I read it, and yeah, it's a really good book. Basically it's about a guy who has 4 friends when he was younger, and they did everything together, you know, they were inseparable, and all his 4 friends had, when you translate their names, had colours in their names. It's like Red Mountain, Green Forest, apart from Tsuruku, so they call him the Colourless Tsuruku because he hasn't got a colour in his name. And for like the beginning of the book, they just hanging out together, they do everything together, and then they all go away for the summer, and when they come back from their break, none of his friends will talk to him, and they all sort of shun him, and but they won't tell him why they won't talk to him. They just won't talk to him anymore, and he gets really depressed and down about this because they won't explain what's going on or why they won't talk to him. Then it jumps forwards in time to him as an adult, and he's moved out of town and he's met this new love interest, and he tells her the story of when he was younger. Then she sort of says to him she'll only continue going out with him if he resolves what happened to him when he was younger. So she convinces him to go back to the town and speak to his 4 friends and find out what happens. So then it's sort of his journey back to the town, and he goes and speaks to the friends, and you know, it unravels of why they were not talking to him anymore. It's a really interesting book. It's got a nice sort of mystery to it. The only thing I didn't like is it goes all the way through the story and it gets right up to the end, and it builds up to something right at the end, and then it ends and it sort of leaves it open to interpretation, and I didn't like that. I can see why they did it, you know, keeping it open-ended, and then it's sort of down to you to fill in what happens, but I didn't like that bit at the end. But the rest of the book is really good, and I recommend reading it. So book number 7 is another LAymon book, and it's The Beast House. Now this is the sequel to The Cellar. This is the book I read first, and then I had to go back and read the first book, and again it builds on the first book and it's better than it. I think the Beast House books get better as they go along, apart from the last one, that's not very good, but this one was really good. This is probably the book that really got me into reading Richard LAymon, and it takes off from the last book. It comes back to there's 2 characters from the first book that get left behind, trapped inside the Beast House. Actually, there's a house opposite the Beast House which belongs to a family that own the Beast House, and this house has no windows on it, and it only has one front door, and the reason is because the person who owns the house doesn't want the beast getting into their house, so you know, there's no way in apart from the front door. But then you sort of find out a bit later that there's a tunnel going between the 2 houses so they can go backwards and forwards. And in the cellar, the 2 people get captured and they get chained up in the owner's house. So it jumps forward a few years, and these 2 people are now working with the people who own the house, and they are running the house as sort of like a tourist attraction, showing people around and telling them the story of the beast that lives there. This one also has 2 stories running through it. It's got a woman who's coming to the town looking for her ex-partner, who is a police officer who went missing. He is mentioned in the first book, The Cellar. There's a bit in there where a police officer goes into the house and gets killed, and it links onto that. She doesn't know he's dead, but she goes to town looking for him. She meets up with a couple of other people, and then they end up going into the house looking for the beast. And then the other story, there is a young girl who works in sort of like a motel nearby in town, and she finds a diary which is left behind in one of the rooms from the original woman who runs the beast house, and it tells the story of where the beast comes from and gives you a lot of background information. She gets hold of this diary, she contacts a local author and tells him about this, and then he comes along to try and buy this diary off of her. And that's the sort of second story going along. Again, it's really crazy. The more it goes through the story, the more nuts it gets. LAymon really writes sort of, they feel like 80s, 70s or 80s sort of horror movies, like The Hills Have Eyes, that sort of era of horror, and it's just really good fun. His books aren't the best written books, but they are real page turners, and you'll be laughing as well as cringing at a lot of the things which he talks about in these books. Really good book, The Beast House. Books number 6 is The Lawmen, which is a Western book, and I'm not really into Westerns, but again, this is actually a Richard LAymon book. It says it's Lee Davis Willoughby, but that was a pen name. These books, called Making America, came out in the 80s, and there was a whole series of them, and they were all written by different authors, but they all went under that same pen name. So this is quite a uncommon Richard LAymon book. A lot of people know that this is written by him, but it's actually in the copyright that it was written by him. And this is a Western, but it's written very much in his style of horror. Again, there's lots of gore and crazy things happening in it. So if you like Richard LAymon, you're going to really love The Lawmen. It's set in the time with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and is it the Pinkertons? The law people are trying to hunt down this gang of killers, and he falls in love with this woman from the gang, and he has to go and rescue her. And it's just a very good twist on Westerns, and I'm not a Western fan, but I did really enjoy this book. There is a very good twist at the end of this book as well, which I did not see coming, and again made it stick in my mind. So The Lawmen. Now we're getting into the top 5. Now all of these books are 5-star reads for me, and at number 5 we've got another Richard LAymon book, and it's called Once Upon a Halloween. Now this is a quite rare, hard to find book. I got this one, and it was actually signed by Richard LAymon, which is really cool. And so it's quite expensive, but saying that, it is one of his better books. It is more of a sort of young adult book rather than a full-on adult horror book. Set at Halloween, so I'm trying to get the glare off the cover. Set at Halloween, where 2 girls are in a house and they're giving out trick-or-treat sweets, and they're getting ready to go out on a Halloween party, when a guy bangs on the door. They let him in, and he comes crashing into the room saying that he's being chased by this cult of people who are trying to kill him. They don't know what's going on, and it turns out there is a cult after him after all. And in true LAymon style, these cultists are all naked for some reason, apart from a belt which goes around their waist with different knives or weapons attached to it, and it all goes nuts from there on in, which is another really cool LAymonism. So it ends up with them all being captured by these cultists. They get dragged down to the local cemetery, and they're doing all their culty stuff, and they manage to escape, and a lot of people get killed. The only bad thing about this book, but it's still a 5-star, is it ends really, really abruptly. You know, it's flowing really well. Loads of stuff's happening all the way through this book. It's like non-stop, and then all of a sudden it just ends, and you're just like, oh, okay. So it felt like he decided that was enough of that book, and I'm just going to finish it there. But apart from that, very cool book. If you can get hold of it, I would highly recommend it. Once Upon a Halloween. My number 4 book is actually a Stephen King book, and it's The Green Mile. And I think this is the only Stephen King book on my list this year. Like I said, the last couple of years I've read a lot of his books, and this was I've only read a couple this year. I put off reading this one for quite a while because I've seen the movie and I heard that it's very close to the book, and I really loved the movie, so I wanted to read some of the other books first. But I'm really glad I read this book. I would say it's very, very close to the movie, so if you love the movie, you're going to love the book. It does add a lot of other things to it. Well, not a lot, a few other things to it. Get a bit more background to why the different people are in prison, not John Coffey, the other characters. The movie doesn't really give any backstory to why they're there, and this sort of tells you why they're locked up and why they're doing life and them being executed. So that was good to get some background. Also, there's a change in here where the main character, the old guy who's telling the story, when it jumps back to him in the nursing home, there's actually a nurse that is bullying him, and he's a really horrible person, and it triggers him to remember the story of Percy, the horrible guard in the Green Mile. So that bit is a bit more of a twist to the story, that he's actually dealing with somebody really nasty in his elderly life, like he did when he was working in the prison. The Green Mile, like I said, if you love the movie, you're going to love the book. It's quite a fast-paced book, so if you've never read a Stephen King, this is probably a really good one to start off with. My number 3 book is another Layman book, and it is The Stake. This is one of his most famous horror books. This is one a lot of people talk about when they talk about Richard LAymon, and I would agree this is a 5-star read. This is a very cool take on vampires. I think this is much better than Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Probably a lot of people disagree with that, but this is a lot more fun. It has the same sort of idea. What would it be like to have a real vampire in the town? So basically, there's a group of 4 people who are driving along this road, and they stop in this old abandoned town, sort of like a western type town, but it's all run down, no one's living there anymore, it's all smashed up, and they go in and they just start exploring the old buildings. They find a hotel where the door is still locked, so they break into this hotel, they're messing about inside there. One of them goes up some stairs and she falls through the stairs into the area underneath the staircase. They go in there and they find a coffin. They open up the coffin and there is a mummified body in there with a stake in its chest. So they presume it's a vampire. They don't really know, and they have an argument about pulling the stake out, and they don't. They then leave the hotel and they go back to their homes. Now, one of the guys is an author. Like a lot of horror people, they write. That the main guy is always a writer in the books, and he writes horror books. And now his neighbour, who was with him, convinces him to write a story about this woman with the stake in her body, and to do it as a non-fiction book. And he starts to write it, and then he convinces him that they should go back to this town and actually get the body out and pull the stake out and see what actually happens, and video it on a camcorder. And it sort of escalates from there. They go back to the town and they realise there's this mad guy who's a vampire killer who's protecting the body. They have a big fight with him. They manage to get the body back to their garage outside in their house, and sort of goes on from there. I don't really want to ruin it. And they keep going backwards and forwards about pulling this stake out of this woman and see what happens. And I will say that they do pull the stake out at one point, but I won't say what happens at the end. If you like vampire books and you like the style of Richard LAymon, then you're going to really love The Stake. Now, my number 2 book is by a author called Håkan Nesser, which is I think he's from Sweden. And this book is called A Summer with Kim Novak. Kim Novak is a actress from the 60s, I think, and it's basically about these 2 teenage boys who don't really know each other at school, but they end up getting put together over the summer and living out by this lake in Sweden. And it's sort of like a coming of age story of these 2 teenage boys and what they do in the summer. They both have this new teacher who started at the school called Ewa, E-W-A, I think her name is, and they think that she looks like this actress Kim Novak, and they both fantasize about this teacher, and they really like her, and then she comes to stay nearby, and she's got a fiance who ends up being murdered. The police tried to pin the murder on one of the boys' older brothers, and then it turns out that it's not him in the end, and that's where it sort of left. And then it jumps forward to one of the boys being the adult, and he goes back to the lakes and tries to work out who the actual killer of this person was. And like I said, it's a very sort of, I was gonna say, like a quiet story. It's like quite a slow-paced story about these guys growing up, and it's a very well written, clever read. I'm probably not doing it much justice, but I don't want to ruin what happens in it really. The ending again is a little bit weird, not silly or stupid, but the boy in the book, something happens where he gets with somebody and it all goes a little bit weird, but apart from that, it's a really good read. And I think it was actually translated from Swedish as well, and whoever did that did a really good job. It reads really well. Summer with Kim Novak, I'd highly recommend that one. Now my number one read, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone, it was a Richard LAymon book, and it was the third in the series of Beast House books, and it's the Midnight Tour. Now I read this straight after reading The Cellar because I got into the series, and this one is the best one in the whole series. It's quite a thick book, it goes into a lot more detail, and I really feel like Richard LAymon's got into his stride of writing with this story. Now this one is set a few years later, but they've actually set the Beast House up as like a proper tourist attraction. It's all been fenced off, it's got ticket booths, they got employees there who actually show people around the house. When you go to the house, you get these Walkmans where you put your earphones on and it talks you through the different murders as you walk around the house. They got dummies set up in the rooms as where the different victims died. There is a cinema in the town. Somebody's made a movie of the killings and the murders, and you can go down into the town and watch it on the cinema. They've got a gift shop, and so yeah, I found all that really good fun, and it's just funny to think that there's a whole history of these killings and then they build up into this sort of like fairground attraction. It's a really good fun idea. There are the people who work at the house, there's a group of young females which Richard LAymon always loves to write about, and there's one scene where they all meet up at their house and there's like some reason there's like this naked hot tub scene, but there's this weird stalker guy in the bushes, and then they all like chase him and try and track him down, and again it's just crazy Richard LAymon writing, and hilarious really. Again, it's called the Midnight Tour, the main thing in the story, because you can go and do a tour of the house during the day, but once a week they do a midnight tour where they sell these tickets which are quite expensive, and they will take a small group of people around the house at midnight and show you things and talk about things which they're not allowed to talk to the general public about. They also sell it as if like if you go around at midnight you've got the risk of seeing the real beasts coming out at midnight. And there's a group of people who go around at midnight on this midnight tour. They go down into the cellar where it all started, and they find the doors there which leads to the house across the road, but this door is always barred and locked, so you can't go through this tunnel. They go down there on the midnight tour and the gate is open, and I won't go into any more, but the beasts are back. And yeah, really good fun read. If you've never read Richard LAymon, I would highly recommend the Beast House series. Like I said, The Cellar is gonna be a bit sort of jarring for some people. Read it and just don't take too much of that on board. Read the Beast House and then read the Midnight Tour, and that is the best one of the bunch. So there we go. Hopefully that wasn't too long, about 20 minutes I'm hoping, and those were my top 10 books of 2024. I hope to read a lot more in 2025. Like I said in my Christmas video, I am actually writing my own book at the moment, so I'm hoping to finish that this year as well. When I do hope a lot of you will support me and check that book out and give me some reviews. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Hope you had a really good, happy new year, and I will hope to see you in some more videos in the future. Thanks for watching. Cheers.